You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the Options Insider Radio Network, where we go beyond our traditional stomping grounds of your Apples and your Teslas and your VIXs and everything else, and look a little bit farther afield, looking into the crypto world. Going to talk the Bitcoin, the ETH, the volatility, the unusual activity, the SKEW, and a whole bunch more. My name is Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com, as well as, of course, from the ever-exciting Options Insider Radio Network. Glad to see so many of you are having fun over there in the Secret Handshake Club. If you want to learn more, theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go. And, of course, however you listen live after the fact, keep those questions coming. We do love to hear from all of you out there. Let's see who we're hearing from on the program today. I'm pleased to be joined once again by our old friend, Mr. Greg Magadini, the co-founder over there at Genesis Volatility. Greg, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown program, sir.
Thanks so much, Mark. Happy to be here.
All right, we're happy to have you. So let's dive right on into it. It is time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show where we do just that. We break down all the action in the world of the leading crypto asset out there, which is, of course, Bitcoin. There has been a lot of it, but before we get to that, Greg, it's been a few months since you joined us here on the show. In fact, it's been since June 14th, so over 2 months now since you've joined us here on the show. A lot going on in the world of crypto, and of course, a lot going on. You guys, every time I talk to you, rolling out new features, adding some new bells and whistles. So maybe let's start there. Catch us up. What's been lighting up your tape in the world of crypto since we last chatted with you, and what are some of the cool new bells and whistles you guys have added since the last time we chatted?
Thanks, Mark. So one of the cool things that we've added are some DVOL index features. So you can see the DVOL index in terms of correlation to underlying crypto, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum. We can also use the DVOL index to measure the vol of vol. those are kind of really good indicators of how the vol space is moving. We're also we've just incorporated DeFi option protocol open. So now we have some DeFi option data points here in the GVol landscape. And our biggest feature release is an API product. So we currently have institutional customers using our API product, directly connecting to our database, getting all that raw data and analyzing it how they see fit. Those are some of the new features that we have over here at GVol.
Yeah, I was just playing around with it before showtime. A lot to sink my teeth into there as well. We'll have to start incorporating that into future shows. And of course, a lot going on right now in the world of crypto. We'll start with the big dog Bitcoin listeners, up a wee bit since our last show. In fact, back north of that 50,000 level, at least it was ever so briefly out there, hit a high of about almost 50,500. That was earlier today, actually, quite frankly. So off those highs now coming into today's show, right around 49,400 or so. Still a wee bit north of where we were this time last show, up nearly 3,000 handles, about 2,900 from our last show. Of course, had quite the range since our last show as well. We hit about 43,990 on the dark side there. That was last Wednesday. And of course, north of 50,000. So quite the range over the course of the past week. Now, let's break some stuff down. Of course, we got Greg on with us. All these analytics coming at you courtesy of our friends over there in GVol. You know where to go and kick the tires for yourselves. GVol.io is the place to go. If you did that, you can look at stuff like this, like the 1 hour volatility out there in Bitcoin. We've been saying for a while, what's going to happen with Bitcoin vol. It seemed like it was showing signs of acting like precious metals vol, which is effectively it kind of languishes for a while, gets a little bit of a bid, a little bit of life, and then it kind of comes off again very quickly. And Bitcoin has been doing a little bit of that of late. These days, kind of hanging out in the 80-odd% land. That's pretty much where we find it again today, coming into today's show at about an 85%, down from about 87% on our last show. Of course, it had a little bit more movement in between episodes, but that is where we find ourselves on the show today. So let's start there. Greg, I know you guys, when you're not talking to me, you're out there watching all things Bitcoin volatility. What's catching your eye out there in the land of Bitcoin from a price action and from a volatility perspective, sir?
Sure. I think the big story in the Bitcoin volatility landscape has been the term structure. So on around August 9th or 10th, we had a huge run-up in implied volatility that was actually led by the back end. So midterm and long-term vol led the way higher, and short-term vol actually ended up just kind of staying flat. It moved up a little bit, but stayed mostly flat. And now short-term vol has come off a lot, and long-term vol is holding put. So we have a really steep term structure. So something that's kind of interesting there is that when we look at the realized vol space, long-dated implied vol is pretty much near the highs of longer-term realized vol measurement windows. So, for example, 1 year implied vol is trading about 97, and then 1 year realized vol maximum is about 88 over the past 365 days. So this gives us a really good indicator that long-term volatility is super expensive. And then the short-term vol is around 71. So you're looking at about a 26-point vol differential between the shortest dated implied volatility and the longest dated implied volatility. So vol sellers are definitely getting a nice roll down here in the space, and we find this very interesting.
Off the top of your head, Greg, can you think of another time where you've seen this structure unfold in recent history, sir?
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. Off the top of my head, I think this is kind of like a unique phenomenon. I think the way that this could potentially happen is probably some call rolling. So people are selling. People have an inventory of short-dated calls. They're selling those and using the premiums to restrap a longer-dated call structure, something like that. And that's why you could get a curve shape like we have right now. But I do think this is really rare. I don't think this is common at all.
No, and most times when you have a future and a futures option or related type products with a term structure, you see the bid, something happens, the price starts, action starts moving. Usually that action is in the front portion of the curve, and you get what's called backward listeners, of course, which is the front portion gets wild and woolly and usually is priced farther beyond the longer term. The longer term contracts are usually where the saner heads tend to prevail, and that crazy noise in the front portion of the curve kind of gets squeezed out. But it's actually creeping in the longer term, which is kind of interesting, which is not usually where these things start to play out, which again is interesting and worth noting out here. SKEW wise, coming into today's show, again, net show to show, not a huge change SKEW wise. We had a few swings. Looks like we got as high as about a 5.5. That was even earlier today, positive. Of course, last show we were at about a +3. This week, about 2.5 there. So a lot net show to show, not a heck of a lot in terms of net change. Greg, anything lighting up your tape out there from a SKEW perspective if you've been crunching the numbers over the past week, sir?
Sure. So the SKEW picture, just like the spot price picture, has gotten a lot rosier. So mid-May was obviously a super deep sell-off. So spot prices came crashing, and also SKEW got really bid to the put side. So we saw like -20, -25 SKEW in mid-May, meaning that the puts were about 25 implied vol points higher than similarly priced delta calls. And now, since the beginning of August, we're now back above the zero line, and SKEW is actually positive again, which is no surprise considering sort of the nice rally that we're having right now. And so I'm really happy to see that. But that's just a nice development, and so we're still monitoring that. We did see during the week, though, when Bitcoin tested below 45,000, the short-dated SKEW, call it the weekly options, ended up spiking negative really briefly until support got bought back in the spot prices. So the way that we read that is that there's still a little bit of jitters for buying puts on dips. So options traders are still quick to hedge. But overall, as long as we're still holding support levels, the overall SKEW picture is a lot more bullish.
Yeah, I've been waiting for these SKEWs to really kind of roar back to life aggressively on any sort of these sell-offs. You know, for a while there, we actually saw the puts threatening to overtake the calls in terms of total OI. Not the case these days, listeners. In fact, calls almost 2-to-1 outnumbering the puts out there in Bitcoin. Calls right now at about 107,000. That's up about 8,000 from last week, so opening slightly this week, and then puts at about 56, almost 57,000. That's up about 4,300 from this time last week. It's not quite 2-to-1, but pretty darn close out there, again, showing kind of what Greg was talking about. Is still pretty bullish out there, and net from an OI perspective, a lot more action on the call side. Usually we see that longer term. That's kind of been always the bias to the long term, has been to the upside to the calls. And if there is put activity, it's flocking in nearer term. But these days, not seeing as much commensurate put activity. In terms of where you folks are lining up from an expiration perspective, where are you putting on your positions right now? It still is the near-dated stuff, with September leading the dance with about 47,800 contracts, up about 2,500. Again, not a huge change, but a decent change from last week. Then December, number 2, with about 46,500 contracts, opened up about nearly 2,000 from this time last week. And August actually bringing up the rear with about 36,500. It's growing. It's up about 8,100, but I'm not sure if it's going to have enough time to overtake the quarterlies before it too goes the way of the dodo. In terms of open interest out there, how much notional value, and again, you guys know I'm not a huge fan of notional, but that's kind of the way the crypto numbers are crunched, so I can only fight it for so long. The notional value of the outstanding OI at about 8 billion out there on Deribit, and about 9 billion if you add in all the other venues. It's up about $1 billion from this time last week, combination of a little bit more flow and a little bit more upside on the tape as well. Every other venue out there seems to be fighting tooth and nail for second place behind Deribit. They're all kind of hovering right around $250,000 worth of notional OI. OKEX is at 240, CME is at 232, Bit.com's at 235 million. Actually, the one that's kind of standing above the others, if ever so slightly these days, remains Ledger X. They're close to 300 million, about 294 million. Everyone else is kind of hovering right around that $250 million worth of notional area out there. Greg, are you surprised? I mean, this has kind of been a theme we've had for a while now. We have seen some interesting price action in Bitcoin. Haven't really seen the commensurate options flow to go with it. This is another week where we've seen pretty decent price action, yet not a ton of volume on the tape. Does that surprise you, sir? Or are you kind of used to that by now?
I do think that the kind of lower volume in the Bitcoin space is indicative or coincides nicely or is congruent with sort of a softening volatility profile. So the way I like to think about it is that when things are moving, that entices people to come in to the options market and start trading some volume, trading some Bitcoin contracts. But as vol goes down, people sort of lose interest. Now, the point about this that's a little bit odd is that we're having a really nice rally. And so usually that rally, especially in the crypto space, gets people excited about crypto again. But despite the rally being sort of one way, the intraday volatility with this rally has been lower than the past. So realized vol is still going down. It's bringing down implied vol along with it, despite the rally. So I think it's congruent, but I bet if we actually hold above this 50K and can actually move higher, we might actually see a changing picture. Or for whatever reason, we can get back below the 40K handle. I bet we see a changing picture for realized vol and volumes.
That would be nice. We did see a brief spark of life. We've been talking for a while again. We not quite at the levels we saw back in, let's say, April and May when the sell-off was really in its depth there. We saw 2 billion worth of notional days flying hot and heavy. Not quite at those again out there, but we did see a brief spark on the 20th this month. I saw 1 billion worth of notional changing hands again. It's the first time in about a month that we've seen that much paper on the tape. So that was one little ray of sunshine out there. The rest of the week kind of steady, but mostly light. So the 20th was the one ray of sunshine, 1B back on the board again. But again, most other days, pretty far from that. Let's look really quickly now, see where you folks are lining up your trading from a strike perspective. Where are you folks putting on the trades? Where are the size positions out there in Bitcoin options right now? And interestingly enough, this top 5 looks pretty similar to what we saw last week, just a little bit more paper on the tape this week. Number 1 strike, still the 50,000 strike, which is now the at the money strike. So there you go, holding firm there with about 10,500 contracts, up about 1,500 from this time last week. So slightly increasing, not a ton. If we keep hanging out at this 50,000 level, that remains the at the money strike for a while. I'd imagine that number is going to grow. Number 2 is the par strike, the 100,000 strike with 9,200 contracts open. It's up about 1,000 contracts from this time last week. Number 3, the 60,000 strike. Nice little call strip here. 7,900 contracts, actually down a few hundred from this time last week. Number 4 is the 20,000 strike. Seems pretty far in the rearview mirror now with about 7,300. It's up a couple hundred, not much, kind of a rounding error from this time last week. Number 5 is the 80,000 strike with about 6,800 contracts, up about 600. And Greg, we first started talking about this last week, and it cracks me up, so I wanted to bring it up again. If we expand our top 5 to include a top 6, Greg, then number 6 is the 200,000 strike with 5,900 contracts open. Fortunately, that number is unchanged from last week. What are your thoughts, Greg, on these top 5 positions and the fact that the 200K strike is lurking just outside at number 6, sir?
Yeah, I think the 200K strike is definitely interesting. Probably a little optimistic, although I do think a lot of the flow has been selling the 200K strike. So especially in that kind of higher volatility environment, people love to sell these far out of the money.
One would hope they're not buying it, sir.
Yeah, exactly. They're just yield enhancing positions. That's how I like to think about it. The 50K strike, I think, is super exciting, especially going into expiration this month. So we have that quarterly expiration. I think it's going to be potentially a lot of sparks going into this OI expiration as we hover right around 50K, coming off of, some might say, extended rally. And 50K is a big psychological resistance point. So I do think that's something interesting as well.
Well, we'll keep an eye on all these levels as we keep on rolling. Looks like not a lot going up out there in the land of CME this week as well. A quiet week for the options. The busiest day was about 68 contracts. The OI ticking up a little bit, getting close to 1,000 now, which again isn't much, but that's a 5x contract. So you're talking a little bit more beef out there. In terms of the futures, same deal. The number is pretty quiet out there. It used to be for a while, we'd see 20,000+ contracts going up a day pretty easily out there in the CME futures. These days, quiet period, about 7,500 contracts or less pretty much every day over the course of the past week. And that OI is hovering around 7,000 contracts as well. A lot of you seem more interested in the micro Bitcoin contracts, those holding steady at around 16,000 contracts pretty much every time we check in on them. And the OI is up to about 22,500. That's up quite a bit. It's up about nearly 7,000 contracts over the past couple of weeks. So that is starting to grow and maybe a sign that you folks are a little bit more intrigued by the smaller bite-sized type stuff. I know you guys are also intrigued by the altcoin universe, so let's head out there next.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the show where we go beyond the big dog that is Bitcoin. But first, we have to take a quick stop, break down the top 10 out here. Let's check in. Number 10 is Solana now with 20.8 billion. Number 9, USD coin, about 26.9 million or so. Number 8, Polkadot, 27 billion. Easy for me to say. Number 7, we got our old friend Doge lurking there at about 41.5 billion. Number 6, XRP, 57.5 billion. Still looking firm after that impressive rally it had last week, or last couple of weeks, really. Number 5, we have Tether at about 64.5 billion. Number 4, Binance Coin, 83, almost 84 billion. Number 3, Cardano at about 93, almost 94 billion. Number 2, ETH at about 389 billion. And number 1, the big dog, getting a lot closer to that 1T level again, 928 billion out there in Bitcoin. But let's turn our attention to the number 2, even though I know for a lot of you out there, it's number 1 in your hearts. That is ETH having another decent week, kind of net holding firm, up about 100 points, actually almost exactly 100 points on the week. So still looking pretty good. Had a range of about 29.50 on the dark side. That was last Tuesday, and nearly 3,400, about 33.75. That was earlier today. Let's see if we've broken it since then. Nope, still hovering around that 33.22 level out there. I know, Greg, you're more of an ETH guy than even a Bitcoin guy. So I'm sure you've been paying attention to this move, this resurgence out there. What's been lighting up your tape in ETH since the last time we chatted, sir?
Yeah, big ETH fan over here. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff. So the London hard fork, which was the upgrade that we saw just in the past month, created a new, what they say, ultrasound money, which is basically a new fee scheme for miners. So instead of having just a direct auction where whoever has the highest gas price gets their transactions executed first and miners receive the fee, now we have basically a base fee, which is set by the protocol. And that base fee will burn the amount of ETH in existence. And if people want to have their transactions processed first, they can still, quote unquote, tip the miners, which is kind of the old system. And this combined will create a deflationary, or they expect to be deflationary supply for Ether. So they expect Ether to decrease its supply by about 1.4% per year. So that's something that's really exciting. I think people are really jazzed about that in the Ethereum space, combined with the move to proof of stake, which is great for sort of the environmental picture. And lastly, combined with everything that's going on DeFi and the NFT space and all that stuff. So that's kind of the fundamental backdrop. In the vol space, we're actually seeing some really interesting stuff. So one of the main interesting things is the term structure, kind of the same deal that we're seeing in Bitcoin, where long-dated vol has actually led the term structure higher, and short-dated vol is now a lot lower, causing a super steep contango curve. But on the flip side, the skews, comparing relative skew versus ETH to Bitcoin, we can see that skew is a lot more bullish or optimistic or pricing upside vol for ETH compared to Bitcoin. So I think that's pretty exciting. And then we also have reports by institutional firms such as Goldman Sachs or UBS, who are noting this increased enthusiasm for Ethereum and the potential flippening of the Ethereum market cap compared to Bitcoin's market cap, which, if that does happen, assuming current valuation of Bitcoin's market cap, would probably put Ethereum around $8,000 a coin.
The flippening, I like that term. That happened, sir. I clearly did not buy enough at the dip. I need to go back and buy some more there, sir. But yeah, interesting stuff afoot out here in the ETH landscape. You mentioned the vol. The vol kind of holding steady since our last show. It was just ever so slightly in the triple digits on our last show. Remember, ETH's been structurally a little bit more volatile than Bitcoin for at least for the last few months out here. It was holding firm at about 104% last week. This week at about a 98%. So coming in a little bit, just dropping ever so briefly below the triple digit level. SKEW, same deal as well. Not a huge evolution since our last show. Last show was about a positive 8.3 this week, about a 10.3 out there. I know you kind of just broke down the term structure out there, Greg. But anything catching your eye from a more near-dated vol or indeed from a SKEW perspective these days, sir?
Yeah, I think the SKEW picture is really, it's still kind of favoring this longer-term call bid. So typically this is how we see cryptos being priced, at least in the past couple of years, is that long-dated SKEW is more expensive to the call side versus short-dated SKEW. But the really interesting comparison is that short-dated SKEW didn't go negative at all this past week, and hasn't really gone negative since the beginning of August, whereas Bitcoin was able to flip back negative briefly when Bitcoin prices dropped below 45,000. So this sort of panic put buying that we saw in Bitcoin isn't being reflected in Ethereum quite the same way. So I do think that's very telling.
Let's see what all this volatility and SKEW is telling us from a volume perspective, and kind of similar to what we saw out there in Bitcoin. A few sparks of life over the course of the past week, but nothing earth-shattering out there. The busiest day was, again, the 20th with nearly 300 million worth of notional on the tape. If you've been paying attention to the show for a while, you know we saw multiple 1 billion worth of notional days going up back in April and May. So nothing quite like that, even though that is a lot busier than what we've been seeing in like the depths of July and into early August, where it was kind of mostly kind of just rounding errors out there. Not a lot of volume really on the tape. Coming into showtime here, we had a little bit of increase in the OI out there in ETH land, but most of it coming, again, on the call side of the ledger. Not a lot of love for the puts out there right now. Calls in ETH at about 842,000 contracts open right now. It's up about 27,000 from this time last week. The puts are at about 438,000. It's up about 6,000. So again, you're close to 2-to-1 calls versus puts. Very similar to what we're seeing lining up out there in Bitcoin. In terms of the notional value of said OI, not a huge change since this time last week. It was about 4 billion worth of notional last week and about 4 billion open this week. And unlike Bitcoin, where we have some other venues that are struggling to get in there, not a heck of a lot else going on the ETH front outside of Deribit. But you got a little bit on OKEX. You got almost 200 million, about 183 million. And that's really kind of about it. Not a heck of a lot of other venues really doing much from an ETH perspective out here. Let's see what you guys are doing from an overall expiration perspective. Where you folks are lining up from a month and indeed from a strike perspective. Let's start with the expirations first. Again, ETH is usually very quarterly heavy, and that's pretty much continuing to be the case. December leading the dance. So that kind of goes back to what Greg was saying earlier about some of the longer dated contracts and the term structure kind of leading the dance right now. DECE definitely doing so. 415,000 contracts. It's up about 20,000 from this time last week. That's a far cry from the number 2 spot, which is September, which is just a few contracts under 300,000, about 297,000 open in September right now. It's up about 9,000 from this time last week. And a distant number 3, we have August with just a tick over 200,000. That's up about 32,000. So August is growing, but again, not going to have time probably to eclipse the big dog, which is December. Let's see what's big and sizable out there from a strike perspective. Where are you folks lining up? Where are the big options positions right now in ETH? And the 5,000 strike has kind of been where a lot of your fascination has been for some time. And that continues to be the case right now. In fact, it's up pretty strong this week. The 5,000 strike has about 88,000 contracts open, up 21,300 from this time last week. So that's a lot of increase on the 5,000 strike, even as we mostly vacillated around this, 3,400 level for the better part of the last week. We saw then number 2, not quite the equivalent of the 200,000 strike, probably closer to the 100,000 strike. That'd be the 10,000 strike in ETH with about 57,300. That's up about 4,000 from this time last week. A closer to home and more relevant strike, the 4,000 strike, comes in at number 3 with about 50,400 contracts, opened up about 2,600 from this time last week. Number 4, it's the 8,000 strike with about 42,000, contracts opened up about 4,000 from this time last week. And rounding out our top 5 here, kind of a nice little upside call strike strip for the most part. The 6,000 strike with about 41,300, up about nearly 2,000 from this time last week. Greg, anything jumping out at you from either December, kind of leading the dance still out there in ETH, or any of these strikes really jumping out at you, sir?
Well, I got to say, I love the Darebit $50,000 strike. That is my favorite strike. That is
a good one. I think you mentioned that the last time you were on. I think you're the first one to bring that to our attention. And you're right. That's beyond the 200,000 strike in Bitcoin. That's another level.
Another level indeed. Something that we do think is pretty interesting is that we've seen a lot of increase in volume being blocked on Paradigm. And so over the past week, a lot of the activity has been call spreads for Ethereum. About 40% of the total volume was call spreads. And 66% of just the regular flow was on the call side. And almost all of this flow was between the $5,000 and $10,000. $5,000 and $10,000 strikes. So I do think that's really interesting. I think people are eyeing this $5,000 strike as kind of the next logical psychological point. So I wouldn't be surprised that Ethereum tests that before the end of the year. And again, if we do see a flippening, that really puts Ethereum in the $10,000 ballpark zone. So those are interesting zones, the 5 to 10,000, and we'll see what happens there.
The 50,000 strike, that's well beyond a flippening, sir. That's a double flippening at that point. I don't know where we're looking at relative to Bitcoin. What is a 50,000 ETH? What does that even translate to into Bitcoin? I have no idea what is going on. And that's you talking dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria at that point, I think.
That's the flippening of the Federal Reserve. That's what 50,000 ETH.
Yes, ETH is now the reserve currency of the U.S. at 50,000 here. If you're wondering, listeners, how many people are playing on that 50,000 strike, there's quite a few contracts open. Not quite enough to break into our top 5 or even our top 10, but it isn't that far outside of it. 28,500 contracts open right now on the 50,000 strike. Yes, 50,000 in ETH. So more than 10x where we are right now, listeners. That's quite a run, and that'd be quite a sea change in the world of crypto if that were to indeed come to pass. So far, the ETH futures over there at CME are not exactly reflecting that new optimistic future. The OI is at about 4,000 contracts, up slightly this time last week. And most days, it seems like the contract does about 4,000 contracts. So it's kind of glued around that 4,000 level out there. Before we keep on rolling into some other altcoin, I know, Greg, whenever you're on, you always have some interesting altcoin up your sleeve. And I know you're big on the whole DeFi universe as well. So what's been catching your eye out there as well, sir?
Well, my personal pet project, altcoin crypto, is Polkadot. I think Polkadot's pretty interesting.
Is that because you watched Suicide Squad recently? You're a big fan of Polkadot Man now? Is that why?
I'm actually not familiar with that. So I'll have to check that out. But what I do actually really like about Polkadot is Gavin Wood. I mean, he's one of the main developers on Ethereum. He wrote the Ethereum Yellow Paper. And Polkadot is sort of an extension of what ETH 2.0 will be. So ETH 2.0, one of its scaling solutions is basically having a bunch of shards that all reconcile to the beacon chain. And the beacon chain is sort of the final settlement layer. Well, Polkadot is sort of the same concept, except Polkadot has a relay layer instead of a beacon chain. And instead of shards, they have parachains. And what parachains are pretty much their own sort of little ecosystem that gets resettled to the relay chain. But you can actually plug like Bitcoin as a relay as a parachain. You could plug Ethereum as a parachain. And so those dynamics kind of broaden out the blockchain ecosystem and create a lot of interoperability. So I think that's pretty interesting. And another sort of segment about this is that the way that people get parachain slots is that they have to lease their Polkadot or basically lock up their Polkadot in order to receive a parachain slot. And what that does is that it really diminishes the float. So we haven't had a parachain launch yet on Polkadot, although we have on Kusama, which is basically the Polkadot live testnet. And so those developments are super exciting. I can't help but think that that's pretty bullish once Polkadot starts launching these parachain slots, and then the float gets diminished. The combined effect of sort of bullish news and lower float, I think, is pretty good for prices. So that's my pet project, is the Polkadot altcoin crypto.
Well, Polkadot, it has been lurking around there in our top 10 for quite some time. Let's see, where was it today here? Polkadot was there at about number 8 there. So it usually is represented well in our top 10 at about right now at about 27.2 billion. So again, a far cry from the big dogs, but if the success of Suicide Squad and Polkadot Man has anything to do with it, it will take off. Looks like we got another fan here in the chat room Nichols saying, Polkadot Man for the win. Yeah, I'm with you. That was an intriguing and weird movie, but and a very strange character, but a fun one nonetheless. Let's see what else is lighting it up out here in the world of altcoin. I know many of you will be heartbroken listeners to know that it wasn't much of a week for Ripple, up about a cent. But of course, it exploded over the previous week, so it's got to take a bit of a break out there right now. A lot of you, I know, still really can't get access to Ripple, so it's frustrating, I know. But still, it has been fascinating to watch these movements out there coming into showtime. We had XRP right around 123, 124, so still well north of that $1 level. And again, not that far away from its all-time high was in the $3 range, a ways back, 330, 360, somewhere in that range. So much closer to that than it was when it was threatening 30 cents back not too long ago to the dark side there. Bitcoin Cash taking a break this week, down about 20 and a quarter, and Bitcoin SB down about 585. Maybe I'll start adding Polkadot into these rundowns here as well. I know also many of you will be heartbroken to know, listeners, that Doge taking a break this week as well, down a whopping 2 cents after getting that big bid last week because Mark Cuban and Elon Musk deciding to do the 1-2 tandem of how much they love Doge again. And that's all it takes to send that one skyrocketing into the stratosphere. So I guess there was no uplifting tweets this week. So Doge settling down a little bit. But it's always uplifting. It's you folks. Let's get at it. A little bit of your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Crypto Questions, a portion of the show where you guys take the reins, your questions and comments. Sometimes we turn the spotlight back on you, like we did last week, Greg. We had a question for our audience out there, a little poll question. We asked them straightforward. He said, everyone had vol on the brain, especially when we posted this time last week. But which of these products holds the volatility crown? Quite simply, which of these has the highest 30-day at-the-money volatility? Don't look it up on your broker. What does your gut tell you? And clearly, your guts collectively told you it was Bitcoin, with exactly 50% of our audience out there choosing Bitcoin as the highest 30-day at-the-money volatility. We gave you 4 choices, though. We gave you Bitcoin, VIX, crude oil, and Tesla. And again, Bitcoin got exactly half of the vote. We have VIX at 21.1%, crude oil at 13.3%, and Tesla at 15.6%. So a lot of those, Tesla and Bitcoin in particular, are typically synonymous with volatility in the minds of a lot of people. But it was kind of a bit of a trick question, listeners. We kind of threw you a bit of a curveball there. I know it's a bit of a meta concept to think of the volatility of volatility, but if you listen to our shows like the Option Block or Volatility Views, you hear us throw a number out there called VVIX all the time. That is the volatility of VIX. And if you've been listening since the pandemic, you'll know that number hasn't really dropped below 100 and hung out most of the pandemic north of 120. So that's a good proxy for what the 30-day volatility is in VIX, which is triple digits. So nothing else here is going to really rival that. Even Bitcoin, which has this, this widely held viewpoint that it is super volatile. We just told you the number today. It's at about an 85 right now. It's creeping up a little bit more farther out, but hanging out at about an 85 right there in that front month contract. And then Tesla, which everyone thinks is super volatile, only about a 40.5 volatility out there. And WTI even less, at about a 35 out there right now. So may have been tricky, but we did give you the answer if you listen to our other shows. We've said VVIX many times, and that was the one. Greg, what are your thoughts on this persistent belief that Bitcoin is still the most volatile thing on the planet, sir?
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I think it's basically the price history of Bitcoin. So if we look at the price history, we basically have started at 0 and now is $50,000. So I think that's hard to shake.
Yeah, I mean, they have shows like Silicon Valley that have whole plot points around the volatility of Bitcoin. I think one of the guys had like a trade alert on his screen, and whenever it moved a certain level, they would play some death metal. So it was just blasting death metal all day because it was so volatile. So yeah, it's kind of seeped into the vernacular. Oh, Bitcoin is kind of synonymous with volatility. So I could see why a lot of you did. That's why we put it out there. We wanted to see if you would fall for our trickery. And alas, you did. This week's question, by the way, listeners, is a fun one. Check it out if you're not there at options already. Getting back to kind of that main volatility theme, we have seen a lot of turbulence in the market recently, a lot of movement in Bitcoin as well. So you could maybe, if you want to apply this to Bitcoin, you can as well. We said, but quite frankly, what do you think is the main driver of this latest round of volatility? Gave you 4 choices: the Delta variant, what's going on in Afghanistan, the concerns over the Fed tapering, or the overall market valuation concerns. Right now, the Fed is winning the dance with about 42% of the vote, with a tie for number 2 between the Delta variant and the market valuation at 25% each. So interesting stuff. Get on over there at options. If you're not following us, you should, because we have great polls and a bunch of other fun stuff throughout the week as well. So if you like to play along in these, you can. Speaking of playing along, if you're playing along in our secret club, you get access to the live chat and you get bumped to the top of the list with all of your questions, just like Nichols does here right now. He wants to know, Greg, he says, can I look at any other cryptos in GVOL other than Bitcoin and ETH? Obviously, Bitcoin and ETH, the kind of 2 big dogs out there. But you were just talking about some stuff going on with DeFi you're adding to the mix over there. So if folks come to Genesis, Greg, and they like Bitcoin and ETH, maybe they want to look a little bit beyond. What else can they find, sir?
Yeah, so we have a feature for realized vol. So we basically have the top 90 altcoins. We have all their realized vol. We have 10-day realized and 30-day realized, constantly updating. And as far as implied vol goes, we actually just partnered up with Delta Exchange. They're a crypto options exchange out of India, and they have options listed on a bunch of altcoins as well. So they have Link, which is basically Chainlink, Litecoin, XRP, BNB, and Bitcoin Cash. Bit.com is another one that also has Bitcoin Cash options. So those altcoins also have listed option markets on them.
Well, there you go, Nichols, and anyone else who wants to know. So if you're kicking the tires over there at gvol.io, want to know what else you can check out? That's a good list. Of course, you get the full sampling of your Bitcoin and your ETH and all that other fun stuff too. Got a section here for DeFi, a bunch of cool stuff. You could spend a lot of time. Trust me, I have. It's a rabbit hole. You get sucked down it. Greg, you must get sucked in it all the time. You're playing around with your own tools, and next thing you know, 2 hours have gone by, sir.
Absolutely. That's why we made them. We are first and foremost users of these tools, and we find it super interesting.
It's a sign that they work, right? When you get sucked down. So prepare yourself, listeners, if you start playing around. Where did my day go? But it's all good stuff here at the end of the day. Let's look really quickly. Another one coming in here from Todd. Todd wants to know, what are the host's thoughts on ETH Classic? Is it a good substitute for ETH? Well, I could see why folks get lured to the dark side of ETH Classic here, Greg, because, it's as rich as Bitcoin, or excuse me, as ETH is right now. We just said coming into the start of the show, ETH was holding around 30, 33, 22 or so. Oh, yeah, ETH Classic at about $67. So if you want to play in ETH, I can see how that much, much lower price point is certainly attractive. We talked about this before, Greg. I think it's been a while since we've chatted about it. What are your thoughts on ETH Classic and the whole, how it forked from the main ETH with the vulnerability that kind of created that spinoff? What are your thoughts on ETH Classic?
Yeah, so on the negative side or the con side of the ledger, I would say something to watch out for with ETH Classic is you have to monitor the mining pools and the hash rate and make sure that there's enough miners participating to make the chain secure. So we actually saw this in the past where there's a 51% attack, which basically means if you have most of the hash power or most of the mining power, you can create sort of rollbacks and double spends and stuff like that. So that's a pretty significant vulnerability. But on the pro side of the ledger, I would say that, what's stopping someone from making a killer application that happens to live on Ether Classic, and all of a sudden there's a lot of interest in Ether Classic. So theoretically, developing a dApp on Ether versus Ether Classic is pretty similar. And if there's a community that's huddled around this Ether Classic dApp, well, maybe we actually see a resurgence in Ether Classic. So I do think there's a speculative position to be had in Ether Classic. I mean, you could make that argument. It's just a matter of like if the developers are going to come around and start building and supporting something existing on the Ether Classic chain. So I would say that would be the main fundamental driver. That's how I think about it.
All right, everybody. Unfortunately, that music means we've come to the end of this journey through the world of crypto derivatives. What a journey has been. Got all through Bitcoin, the volume, the volatility, the SKEW, the funky term structure, and a whole bunch more headed on out to ETH. Saw similar things afoot out there as well. A bunch of your questions. You guys all thought Bitcoin is the most volatile thing on the planet. ETH, and of course, ETH Classic. Even a little bit of what else is afoot over there. Speaking of what else is afoot, Greg, before we go here, we like to leave our audience wanting more. So if you got any cool hints, any cool teases of what you guys have up your sleeve over there at Genesis, now is the time, sir. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Mark. So the next frontier for us is really the DeFi option space. There's some really cool products being built in that space, even some being built on top of Open, such as Ribbon Protocol, which are structured products for continuous covered call selling, strategies like that. So that's definitely something we're really excited about. If you guys are interested in seeing anything more from GVOL, you can visit our site at gvol.io, gvol.io. We also have a weekly newsletter, which is basically a market recap. We are featuring highlights from Paradigm as well, who are explaining some of the flows going through during the past week. So you can find that newsletter over at genesisvolatility.substack.com. And then you can follow us on Twitter at GenesisVol. And lastly, we have a YouTube channel as well, where we explain a lot of Bitcoin and Ethereum options trading strategies and general option stuff. And you can just type in GVOL in your YouTube search bar.
A lot of stuff afoot over there in the land of Genesis, Greg. Glad to hear it. You guys know where to go to kick the tires and light the fires for yourselves. Begin your journey. gvol.io is the place to go. I can hardly recommend the newsletter for you as well. If you want a nice kind of bite-sized synopsis of the week's worth of action and volatility and trading and SKEW and everything else, you could do worse than checking out that newsletter out there. That's going to do it for us today here on the network. We're back again tomorrow. All of you out there in the secret club, get our fun pro Q&A with Mr. Scott Nations. You've seen him floating around on CNBC and other venues out there. Also the creator of VolDex and SKEWDex, which has now become VolQ, which is the at-the-money volatility product that trades over there on the NASDAQ. So we'll have a lot to talk about with him tomorrow. Back again on Wednesday, of course, for all your educational needs, Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio. Thursday, your double dose of TWIFO and the Option Block episode Due. And then, of course, Friday, another double dose, Volatility Views at noon, followed by Options Oddities for all of our pro members at 2 p.m. Then we're back again next Monday, another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVOL, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVOL Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or Search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.